memory of past travelers, the whispered dealings, the anxieties of arrival, and the hopes of departure. The small rooms built into the upper levels along the interface of the courtyard were for the merchants and the privileged few who could afford the minimal comfort of a private enclosure. Nasser and his senior lieutenants would occupy one of these tiny cells, a space barely large enough for 2 mats and their travel trunks. The walls were thick, insulating sound and temperature, providing a sense of removal from the controlled chaos of the courtyard below for the majority of the caravan workers. Sleep was found on their own bedrolls laid out in the covered arcades, their heads resting on their personal saddlebags, their bodies wrapped against the desert chill that would sink deeply by midnight. The earth was hard, but the safety was paramount. The air cooled rapidly, the transition from the daytime heat to the nighttime chill, always dramatic in these high desert regions. Low fog seemed to creep along the ground, composed of the collective breath of the animals and the rising steam from the warm water troughs. The sounds diminished further, the occasional shuffle of a guard shifting position, the soft groan of a camel adjusting its massive weight, the gentle crackle of the remaining fires. Sky above became a truly black velvet expanse, the stars numerous and sharp. Unimaginably distant glowing points of cold ancient light. Looking up, one felt the immensity of the world and the humbling minuteness of the caravan's journey. A tiny thread of commerce stretched taut across the enormity of Asia. Stillness that settled was not complete silence, but a deep resonant hush, a stillness specific to resting. Travel, a pause and a momentum. In the senior quarters, Nasir was going over his maps and ledgers by the dim glow of a sputtering oil lamp. He tracked their mileage, their rations consumed, and the estimated distance to their next major stop, a large, bustling trading metropolis that signified the true halfway point of their journey. The route was etched clearly on the parchment lines of established trade, marked by oasis names and mountain passes, names that resonated with centuries of myth and history. The logistics were staggering. Every kilometer needed to be accounted for, every contingency plan for a precise orchestration of risk and reward. He checked the quality of the tea bricks, his most valuable commodity, compressed slabs of dark, fermented tea leaves shaped for easy transport and serving as currency in the farther western provinces. He ran his fingers over the rough surface, feeling the density, the careful pressing, the promise of wealth contained within the modest block. Tea was highly prized, its journey long and perilous, making its value exponentially higher with every pass across every difficult region traversed. He was mindful of the dangers that still lay ahead, the threat of heavy snow in the higher passes, the necessity of dealing with various local chieftains who demanded tolls and safe passage fees. This brief respite in the Sirai was a moment to recharge, not to relax, fully sleep. For Nasser, it would be light interspersed with periodic checks on security patrols and the well-being of his key men. He extinguished the lamp, plunging the small room into complete darkness. The only illumination now, the faint glow leaking from the courtyard through the small, high window. He lay down on his thin mat, pulling the heavy embroidered blanket over him, immediately feeling the cold stone beneath his frame. He listened to the sounds of the Sarai, settling the collective breathing of hundreds of sleeping beings enclosed within the powerful defensive walls. The ancient stone of the building seemed to hold the warmth of the day, releasing it slowly, reluctantly. He focused on the rhythm of his own breath, slow, deep, regular, attempting to mimic the steady pace of the resting earth. Outside the walls, the desert waited, vast, silent, indifferent, the true ruler of this land. But here within the etched lines of the Sirai, they were safe, briefly shielded by human ingenuity and the collective effort of trade. The amber glow of the scattered campfires faded into faint red coals, the light retreating from the high arches and the shadowed corners. A guard coughed softly nearby, a sound quickly swallowed by the surrounding silence. The sense of time, becoming irrelevant, took over the hours, blurring into one long moment of deep, necessary rest, a pooling of strength for the trials of the morning, which would bring the chaotic energy of the local market and the inevitable haggling over prices and quality tomorrow. They would exchange the hushed travel rhythm for the loud, assertive tempo of commerce tomorrow. They would prepare for the next leg, the mountainous ascents and the cold, clear air of the high passes. But tonight was only for the velvet silence of the Sarai, the deep unburdening of the body, The quiet settling of the mind, a profound moment of pause in the unending movement of the great Silk Road. The hollow deep pulsed once more. The air inside the chamber tasted of rust and ancient slumber. It was a velvet dark, now thicker than night in the open world. The single amber light carried by the chronicler seemed weak, a fragile thing against the weight of centuries. Stone walls pressed close, but not threateningly, only intimately. If the mountain itself was breathing, slowly sighing out forgotten time, the sound that followed was not language, but resonance. Deep thrumming in the very bones of the earth, it began low, a monk's chant, perhaps, or the turning of a massive unseen. Garrett grew, then shifting into an echoing lament. 1,000 voices gathered in the stillness of the subterranean world. They spoke of loss, they spoke of gold, they spoke of a scepter cloaked in shadow. The chronicler stood motionless, suspended in this river of memory. His hands still rested on the cold etched granite of the central spire. The granite felt suddenly warm, radiating the stored sorrow. He realized the stone was not recording history. It was being history. Every flaw, every crystalline structure was holding fast to moments of sheer, desperate clarity. Could feel the weight of a king's failure, the bitter realization that the high walls meant nothing. The king's voice eventually detached itself from the chorus. It was hoarse and broken, yet imbued with the majesty that even ruin cannot erase. He said, "The well is sealed, the water runs black, now not pure I have hidden the last light beneath the hushed well. The others sought power in the sun, but I sought safety in the deep silence. My lineage must remain untouched until the comet passes 3 times. Only then will the stone accept the true key." Words were slow, measured, deliberate, each syllable falling like heavy sand onto a quiet floor. Chronicler tried to follow the geography of the king's despair, the hushed well. It was a place spoken of only in the oldest fragmented scrolls, a place believed to be myth, a philosophical concept, not a structure of stone and water, but the resonance here in the mountain's gut was undeniable. It was a real place, a final repository of the king's most sacred trust. The chamber began to change. The light, the amber glow seemed to intensify, not from the lamp, but from the granite spire itself. Illuminated symbols that had been invisible before. Runes, carved not into the surface, but somehow beneath it, flowing just beneath the polished skin of the rock. They depicted not battles or crowns, but astronomical events, a procession of 3 celestial bodies moving across a dark expanse, the prophecy was. Tied to the sky, to the slow turning mechanisms of fate, the king's voice returned softer, now almost a whisper in the ear of the present day. They will seek the crown, they will seek the sword, but the true weight lies in the silence. Guard the entrance against the ones who come in false reverence. The stone will know their hearts. The final journey is not outward, it is down deep. Down where the cold is absolute, and the air forgets how to move. A shiver traced the chronicler's spine. The cold wasn't the absolute, now it felt like plunging into midnight water, that heavy, numbing chill that precedes true disorientation. He slowly pulled his hand away from the spire. The moment he broke contact, the chorus of voices vanished. The light faded back to the weak amber of his single lamp. The chamber was silent once more. Profound, heavy silence that swallowed sound. He was alone, surrounded by the velvet dark, yet the darkness felt different now. It was informed, it held purpose. The memory had left a residue. A thin layer of metallic dust on the floor near where he stood. He knelt, carefully touching the dust with his fingertips. It was cold, it was slightly magnetic, and resting within the dust was something small and hard. It was a shard of metal, not gold, not iron, but something ancient and dark. Obsidian, it was etched with a single precise marking knot. A familiar rune, but a miniature depiction of the triple comet conjunction. This was the key, or perhaps a fragment of the key. The king's desperation had manifested physically. Chronicler pocketed the shard, feeling its weight, a surprising density for its size. Air grew heavy, not with voices, but with pressure. He looked back toward the narrow fissure through which he had entered the chamber. The fissure seemed smaller somehow, the stone settling back into its long, slow geological process. Could feel the mountain closing the door behind him. There was no going back. The path was sealed. He had to follow the king's final instructions. The journey was down. He scanned the surrounding walls, searching for any sign of a lower passage. A hatch, a hidden stair. The stone was seamless, impenetrable. He moved his light slowly along the base of the spire where the ancient king had stood. He saw it then not. A door, but a break in the floor's consistency. A perfectly circular patch of stone, slightly darker, slightly smoother than the surrounding granite, was sealed not by mortar, but by some intricate interlocking mechanism designed to remain unseen. For millennia, the hushed well was beneath his feet. He placed the newly acquired shard against the dark circle. There was no click, no grinding of gears, only a deep, almost mournful hum that started beneath the floor and traveled up through the stone. The dark circle did not lift or slide it, simply dissolved, the material seeming to turn to smoke, absorbing into the surrounding rock, leaving a perfectly round aperture. Black opening into an abyss of cold air. He peered down. His amber light was immediately. Swallow the depth was terrifyingly vast. He could hear nothing from below, no drips, no echoes, no wind, just the profound absolute silence the king had promised. Cold rushed out of the opening, enveloping him. It was a clean cold, a forgotten cold. Cold that had waited patiently for the comet to pass 3 times or for the seeker to find the fragmented key. Knew he could not wait. He had been cold into the river of the king's necessity. He retrieved a coil of thin, strong rope from his pack, securing one end firmly around the base of the massive granite spire. The spire had held the king's sorrow, and now it would hold the chronicler's weight. He stood at the lip of the hushed well. The light of his lamp cast long, trembling shadows. Up the walls, he imagined the king standing here centuries ago, making this final terrible sacrifice, entrusting the last light, the heart of the kingdom, to the crushing pressure of the earth. The chronicler took a deep, steadying breath. The air was sweet, but frigid, carrying a subtle scent of ozone and ancient metals. He lowered himself into the blackness, slowly, carefully testing the rope with every inch of descent. The stone walls of the shaft were smooth and cold, almost polished by the passage of time, or perhaps by the constant flow of that black water the king had mentioned. He descended into the heart of the mountain, into the deep silence where the air forgets how to move. His lamp became a single lonely star in the universal black velvet down past the point where the light should have reflected back up, down past the limit of human vision. The rope seemed endless, the descent unending. He lost track of time, of distance, of direction. Was simply falling slowly, deliberately into the historical void. Then his foot touched something solid, not the bottom of the well, not the promised cold water, but a flat, wide step carved into the side of the shaft. He stopped his descent, securing his foothold. He directed his light sideways. He was no longer in a smooth shaft, but in a spiraling staircase of immense scale, carved from the very bedrock, leading down around the circumference of the well. He disconnected from the rope, taking his lamp in hand. The air here was completely still, a pocket of atmosphere. Sealed off from the world, he moved slowly, following the immense downward curl of the staircase. The walls were solid, etched with faint flowing designs that seemed to shift as the light passed over them. They were patterns of movement, not static images. Like the stars turning like water flowing, he reached the landing. Staircase ended abruptly in a massive stone. Lintel before him was a doorway, perhaps 20 feet high, built not for men, but for giants or for majesty. The door itself was a single slab of jet black material, polished to a mirror shine, and carved into the center of the dark slab was a depression perfectly shaped to receive the shard he held in his pocket. He drew out the obsidian fragment. It was pulsing faintly, now a cold internal light. He pressed it gently into the depression. This time there was a sound, a single deep chord, like a cello, played far beneath the earth. Black slab door did not swing open. It slid downward silently, smoothly, sinking into the floor with the majesty of a curtain being drawn on a forgotten stage beyond. The doorway was the core of the king's trust, a chamber vast and high vaulted, far larger than the whispering chamber above. But it was not empty. In the center sat a single structure, a throne, perhaps a sarcophagus, perhaps. It was crafted entirely of pale gleaming material like moonlight turned to stone, and resting upon it was now a skeleton, not a crown, but a small sphere of crystal. It was glowing with an internal soft light that illuminated the hushed chamber, light that seemed to draw all the shadows into itself, leaving the walls clean and stark. The sphere was the last light the king had spoken of, a repository of memory or power or peace. The chronicler stepped across the darkness of the doorway, receding behind him. He walked slowly toward the structure, his footsteps echoing on the perfectly smooth floor as he drew closer to the crystal sphere. He felt a strange pressure on his mind, not hostile, but insistent. He felt the slow, silent turning of stars. The passage of centuries condensed into this one small shining object. He raised his hand toward it. The air around the sphere shimmered then, settled, and then he saw etched into the surface of the sphere, not runes, not symbols, kings, but a face, a human face, sleeping eternally within the glowing crystal. It was the face of Queen Lyra, the king's lost consort. Her eyes were closed, her expression peaceful yet hauntingly aware. He lowered his hand, breath catching in his throat. The sphere was not a light source, it was a vessel. And the king had sealed his beloved wife within the earth, perhaps to save her, perhaps to remember her. But as the chronicler watched, the light intensified for a single moment, and the lips of the sleeping queen moved, slowly, silently forming a single word. The word was not rescue, the word was not freedom, the word was watch. And as he stood there, paralyzed by the sudden chilling intimacy of the scene, the faint sound of footsteps began to rise from the dark tunnel he had just traversed. Footsteps that were definitely not his own. They were slow, heavy, and approaching. The last vestige of the low desert warmth had vanished entirely. Stolen by the rising stone and the relentless elevation, the morning air was not really cool. It was a sharp surgical chill that bit the exposed skin and clung stubbornly to the thick wool of the cloaked riders. They had entered the realm of the high places, the foothills of the colossal mountains, whose summits scraped the deepest velvet blue of the upper atmosphere. The sand beneath the camels' hooves was no longer fine and forgiving yellow powder. It was grit and shale, small stones that shifted and rattled, a ceaseless low symphony of geological movement, a sound distinct from the soft, muffled pad of the days before the caravan moved with an almost unbearable slowness, a deliberate mechanical pace dictated by the thinning air and the increasing gradient of the path. Each exhale of the great Bactrians became a visible cloud, a fleeting ghostly plume hanging momentarily in the hushed morning light before being snatched away by the nascent breeze. The camels themselves were stoic, their long necks stretched low, their massive shoulders rolling with rhythmic labor. Their patience was a boundless thing etched into the very structure of their ancient bones. Dawn's sun struggled to pierce the high mists. It was a distant amber glow illuminating only the very highest ridges, leaving the deep valleys and the winding track still cloaked in gray shadow. The cold seeped into the very marrow of the journey, chilling the leather strapping, chilling the brass fittings, chilling the precious bundles of rolled silk that made up the bulk of their cargo. Camel keeper Jamil walked to his feet, finding purchase on the loose scree. He did not look up often. His gaze was fixed on the ground immediately before the lead camel's legs, ensuring the footing was safe, that no sudden drop or unexpected slide would jeopardize the delicate balance of the load. His breath was shallow, quickened by the altitude. A faint burning sensation in his lungs, a familiar price for traveling this high road to the west. Silence here was profound, unnerving. It was the silence of immense stone in geological time, disturbed only by the grinding friction of their travel. The high passes swallowed sound, muffling it, stealing its echo sometimes. Jamil would stop just for a moment, leaning against the rough hide of a resting camel, and he would hear the faint rush of the wind high above him, sounding like the distant sea, a memory of flatlands long abandoned, empty, or following a track barely visible, worn down over 2,000 years, not by continuous traffic, but by the sporadic passage of weary travelers. Just like them, centuries melted into centuries. The stone beside the path was polished smooth in places by untold numbers of passing feet, hooves, and the brush of heavy bundles, ancient scars, marking the persistent human need for trade and connection. Jamal adjusted the rope securing a large sack of dried fruit. The leather felt stiff and brittle in the cold. His fingers were numb. Despite the thick gloves, he pressed his hands against the warm flank of the camel. A brief, momentary transfer of heat, a small comfort in the vast, unrelenting cold. He counted the remaining beasts, habitually checking their posture, their eyes for Any sign of distress, the desert journey was hard, but the mountain ascent was a different kind of cruelty, slow grinding. Exhaustion masked by the beauty of the colossal landscape. Air was clean, impossibly clean, carrying no scent of smoke, no odor. Of city life, only the faint metallic tang of high-altitude rock and the dry, dusty smell of the camel's wool. The cold intensified the light, making the ember sun, when it finally broke through, seem harsh and dazzling against the gray and white peaks they moved past. The massive boulders split clean down the middle, a work not of man, but of time and frost, an ancient marker cloaked in lichen green and orange. Jamil knew this marker. It meant they were perhaps halfway through this treacherous mountain, meaning perhaps another 2 weeks of continuous upward struggle before the gentler slopes began to fall toward Samarkand, or one of the intermediate gathering points. Thought of Samarkand felt distant, almost mythical, a destination promised to weary children, not a reality for men struggling for purchase on treacherous slopes. He focused instead on the immediate but steady swing of the camel's tail, the low hum of the wind over the saddle, the metallic clink of a bridle chain, remembered? The days when the sand shimmered and the heat made the horizon ripple, a deceptive mirage of water and palms. Those days felt like a fever dream, now replaced by this cold, solid reality of rock and climbing. There was no deception here, only effort. And high track narrowed drastically for an hour, forcing them into single file, the path carved into the side of a sheer cliff face. The drop on the left side was steep, profound, terrifying, a sheer descent into a shadowed valley floor far below. Jamil walked on the outside, ensuring the bundles were snug against the rock face. The camels stepped with extraordinary care, their broad feet. Sensing the minimal margin for error, this was the true test of the Silk Road, not the bandits of the vast, flat emptiness, but this slow, relentless battle against gravity and geology. The raw tonnage of the mountains against the fragile endurance of flesh and bones was so enveloping that when one of the younger camel drivers sneezed, the sound seemed to explode in the thin air, echoing sharply off the stone walls before being instantly absorbed. Jamil signaled for quiet noise. Here was dangerous, unsettling. The concentration required to traverse this pass was absolute, or hers bled into ours, marked only by the shifting angle of the amber sunlight against the gray rock faces. They passed over small streams, rushing torrents of glacial meltwater, frigid and clear, running fast over smooth stone. These were the only sources of fresh water. Pure cold water that promised life but threatened exposure. If one lingered too long, they halted briefly at a small alcove where centuries ago some previous travelers, perhaps Buddhist monks, perhaps earlier traders, had etched simple symbols into. The rock faces crude drawings of mountains of camels, of a wheel of fortune worn smooth by the wind and rain, but still discernible proof that they were not the first to endure this crossing, that the path of the slow trade was indeed ancient. And entering, Jamil drank slowly from his leather flask, the water biting cold against his tongue. He ate a small handful of dried apricot, concentrating on the texture and the sweetness, a momentary burst of energy. His eyes scanned the sky, pale and vast. High above were hawks circled with effortless grace, seeming to mock the slow labor of the creatures. Below, sun reached its zenith, a harsh, white orb bathing the immediate path in blinding light, but failing to truly warm the great mass of the stone. The shadows began to shorten, then slowly lengthen, promising the swift arrival of the evening chill, which here in the mountains was always immediate and unforgiving. They continued their ascent, the movement becoming almost hypnotic. The sway of the saddles, the creak of the wood, the slow measured pace of the hooves, a meditation in motion. 1,000 steps taken, 1,000 steps repeated, the only difference being the slight increase in altitude with every rotation. Velvet bundles of silk were now covered with a fine layer of crystalline frost, where the morning mists had settled and frozen the colors of the raw silk. The deep indigos, the rich matters, the imperial yellows were cloaked beneath this white film, protected by layers of oiled leather and heavy woven mats. But their presence, their value, was the invisible weight driving every weary footstep. Jamil thought briefly of the destination city, the great Western market where these goods would be sold, where the journey would finally end. The thought was vague and comforting, like a distant fire on a cold night. He did not dwell on the riches of the return journey, only on the requirement to keep moving to maintain the slow, hypnotic rhythm of the caravan, the air grew colder still as they turned a switchback, revealing a vast vista of peaks. Stretching away to the horizon, snow-capped immense silent guardians of the route they had crossed the threshold. Now they were truly within the high mountains. The wind began to whisper a low, mournful sound, carrying the faint scent of pine. Resin from far below the tree line. They were far above that line, now beyond the reach of normal vegetation, existing only. Among the stone and the hardiest mountain grasses, light began to shift. Dramatically, the pale amber sun dipping lower toward the western horizon, painting the exposed rock faces in hues of soft gold and deep violet, creating long, exaggerated shadows that raced across the slopes. The caravan became a procession of dark silhouettes against the brilliant backdrop. The figures looked monumental, weary, yet persistent. Jamil recognized the signs the time for finding safe harbor was approaching. In these passes, one did not camp simply anywhere. The cold could kill quickly. The loose rock could slide silently. They needed a sheltered cove, a place where the camels could be hobbled and the fires could be built without the wind stealing the. Heath watched the lead rider, an older, grizzled man who had crossed the Pamirs dozens of times. The rider pointed toward a fold in the landscape, a barely perceptible indentation where the cliff face seemed to cup inwards, offering a natural shelter. A place etched into the memory of generations of travelers. Final push to the campsite was the hardest. The camels, sensing the imminent halt, seemed to drag their feet, their massive bodies sagging with accumulated fatigue, but they moved onward, guided by the sharp, low calls of the drivers and the undeniable promise of rest and forage. Even meager forage was a treasure. Hurriedly descended slightly into the protective fold, the temperature immediately rising by a perceptible degree, sheltered. From the worst of the high wind, the sound of the grinding rock ceased, replaced by the hushed movements of men preparing for the night. The great task of unloading the beasts began. The weighty silk bundles, carefully lowered onto the ground, separated from the rough stone by thick blankets. The fires were started, the tinder catching hesitantly in the cold, thin air, but soon small flames licked upward, fragile beacons of warmth and life against the overwhelming cold darkness settling it around. The perimeter, the shadows danced and flickered, transforming the shapes of the nearby boulders into grotesque silent watchers. Jamal knelt by the fire, watching the amber light deepen into orange. He breathed deeply, the air still sharp but infused. Now, with the comforting smell of smoke and warming stone, he unwrapped his meager ration of dried meat and bread. The food was coarse, the meal silent, shared with the exhausted men and the resting camels. Their ascent was done. The sheer magnitude of the mountains stood above them, a silent black mass against the star-strewn sky. The stars here were intensely bright, sharp points of diamond light piercing the velvet void of space, unfiltered by dust or moisture. They seemed closer, nearer than they ever did in the lowlands. Jamal leaned back against a saddlebag, feeling the deep thrum of exhaustion in his legs. His mind was strangely empty, focused entirely on the immediate needs, the heat of the fire, the safety of the sheltered cove, the knowledge that the relentless climb would continue tomorrow, but for now, this small circle of warmth. This momentary pause in the endless slow labor was all that mattered. The cold wind whistled high above them, a constant reminder of the world outside. Their tiny camp, a vast ancient world of stone and silence, waiting for the dawn to reveal the next weary mile. The air grew thinner, now a hushed velvet cloak settling upon the shoulders of the great mountains. We had left the lowest scorching basin of the endless sand behind us. The dunes faded into a memory of golden ocean, a rippling surface we were pleased to forget. Now the path ascended, slowly, tortuously, spiraling upward, like a sleeping serpent disturbed by the cold light of dawn. The change was profound, a relief that settled deep into the lungs, replacing the gritty heat with a sharper, cooler breath. The scent of juniper and scrub pine began to mix with the pervasive dust of 1,000 miles. The camels, sensing the gradient, moved with a different deliberation, their great padded feet shifting on the loose shale. Instead of the yielding, sifted sand, the rhythm changed. It was less a rocking sway and more a deliberate, measured step against the unforgiving stone. The sun here was different too, not the blinding, brutal white of the deep desert, but a clearer amber hue that fractured against the high slopes. casting shadows that were deep and cold. Even at midday, these shadows offered true respite, true cover from the relentless gaze of the heavens. The drivers cloaked themselves tighter in their wool wraps even before the light began to fade, the chill of elevation, already asserting its dominance, a reminder that the desert was not merely heat, but a land of extremes of boiling day and freezing night. We moved past outcroppings of ancient rock, carved by wind and water across millennia, forming natural sculptures, colossal and indifferent to the fleeting line of men and beasts passing beneath them. These stones were etched with the history of erosion, a geological boredom far deeper than any human journey. The silence here was heavier too, broken only by the sharp clack of a loose stone rolling down a slope or the deep resonant sigh of a camel settling its weight. The trail became difficult, demanding focus. Every footfall now mattered. A slip could mean a serious injury or the loss of precious cargo. The leaders of the caravan walked ahead, tapping the ground with stout wooden poles, testing the firmness of the surface. Where the narrow path edged a sheer drop into the deep gorges below, the silence of the abyss was palpable, a sucking void that demanded respect and vigilance. The silk bales were checked, adjusted on the wooden saddles to ensure perfect balance, because any shifting weight on these slopes would destabilize the animal. The delicate fabric, wrapped in layers of rough canvas and hides, remained the core of our enterprise. The reason for this immense effort, the sheer bulk of it, required constant, meticulous attention. Each bale represented months of weaving, months of waiting, the wealth of empirously on the backs of slow-moving beasts. We stopped mid-afternoon at a high-altitude fortress known locally as the Stone Tooth, a staging post used by travelers for perhaps 2,000 years, a collection of mud brick walls, reinforced with heavy-cut stone blocks, designed to withstand the brutal winds and the unwelcome attention of passing bandits, but mostly designed to simply endure the elements, the sheer dull reality of survival in this harsh place. The process of entry was slow and bureaucratic. The gate was massive, thick oak planks, bound with iron studs, opened reluctantly by guards bundled in heavy quilted coats, their eyes narrowed against the perpetual wind. They carried spears and short, heavy scimitars, but their true weapon was boredom, the patience required to stand watch over nothing but rock and sky for months on end. We waited patiently while the ledger keeper, a man whose face was tanned and cracked like old leather, scrutinized the manifests. The rolls of parchment were brittle with age and transport. The ink faded in places, but the numbers, the tallies, the records of ownership remained vital. This was the language of the road, the only truth that mattered. How heavy, where from, where going, the cold logic of commerce, overriding the fatigue of the journey. Camel load was subjected to a cursory inspection, just enough to satisfy the requirements of the local governor, ensuring no illicit goods passed through, and more importantly, ensuring the correct transit. Fee was levied. The fee was paid in small silver coins, assayed on the spot by a small silent man who tested the metal against a touchstone, ensuring purity. The slow scrape of silver on stone provided a momentary break in the usual drone of the caravan water. Was the next priority. The fortress drew its supply from a meltwater stream high above, piped through covered stone channels, a miracle of engineering in this arid land. The water was startlingly cold, pure, and tasting of minerals in the high peaks. The camels drank deeply, slowly, their huge throats working rhythmically, drawing the life-giving liquid into their bellies. The sound of their drinking was a heavy, sucking gurgle, a sound of deep satisfaction for the drivers. The respite meant the lighting of small, low fires, fueled by dried dung and precious scraps of wood salvaged from the valleys. Below, the smoke was thin and blue, stinging the eyes, but offering a measure of warmth against the fast-dropping temperature. The meal was simple, thick porridge of millet, dried dates chewed slowly for their sweetness, and hard flat bread that required serious jaw strength to consume. The conversations were low, murmuring, tired voices, speaking of the miles past, the dangers avoided, the promise of the cities ahead. Samarkand now felt closer, a tangible goal, an accumulation of desires and transactions, rather than a faraway myth spoken of only in whispers of longing. One old driver, a man named Kassan, who had crossed the mountains uncountable times, spoke quietly of the sky here, how the air being so thin and clean revealed the stars with unmatched Clarity, he said that when you look up from this altitude, you're not looking at the stars, you're looking through them. The very velvet of the night seemed closer. More intimate, more terrifyingly vast later, under the deep obsidian bowl of the mountain. Sky Kessen's words were proven true. The cold was intense, but the sight was mesmerizing. The millions of scattered pinpricks of light seemed to hang so Luon felt they might reach up and pluck a glowing mote from the celestial sphere, the Milky Way stretched across the zenith like a plume of white powdered sand, a river of endless cosmic dust. The watch was set, 2 men pacing the perimeter of the fortress courtyard there. Shadows long and wavering in the moonlight, the stillness was absolute, broken only by the faint shifting of the resting camels. The sound of their cud chewing, a repetitive, gentle grinding sound, a sonic anchor in the immensity of the silence. Night air carried the sharp, earthy smell of animal sweat and dry stone mixing faintly with the luxurious scent of the closed cargo. The cinnamon, the pepper, the cloves wrapped tight, but still exuding their powerful promise of flavor and distant lands. The spices were truly miraculous in their preservation, holding their volatile essences for months. Across deserts and mountains, across the entire known world, we slept wrapped in layers of wool and camel, hair dreaming of softness and rest. The cold seeped into the bones, a constant low-level ache that became simply of the reality of travel here. A dull, constant reminder that the earth itself was cold and unforgiving. The morning broke late here, the high peaks, delaying the arrival of the direct sun. The light, when it finally touched the fortress walls, was pale yellow, then quickly hardening to a brilliant gold that chased the deep blue shadows down the valley walls. The movement of preparing to leave was slow, ritualistic. The careful repacking of the animals, the tedious lashing of ropes, ensuring the knots would hold against the ascent. We were heading higher now, towards the passes that sliced through the backbone of the Pamir Range. The transition was stark. The shale gave way to denser granite, gray and formidable. The trails were carved into the rock face, sometimes barely wider than a single camel's girth. Wind became a continuous presence, not a sudden gust, but a relentless pressure that howled down the ravines, a piercing sound that demanded that the travelers cup their hands over their ears to communicate. It was a sound of solitude, a sound of geological force. Unchecked by man, the altitude began to affect some of the younger drivers. Their breathing became shallow, strained, their movements sluggish. Cassin, the old driver, offered them small pieces of dried apricot, saying the slight sweetness and moisture would help clear the heaviness in their heads. This ancient wisdom passed down through generations of travelers held more weight than any physician's advice. The camels suffered too, though they were creatures of profound endurance. Their thick coats now seemed inadequate against the chilling bite of the air. Their breath came out in misty white plumes, a ghosting of their great effort as they labored uphill, pulling the thousands of pounds of wealth. The path curved sharply around a colossal monolithic spire of rock, a natural marker that had guided caravans for 1,000 years, known simply as the finger of God. Its summit cloaked perpetually in cloud. The silence of its presence was overwhelming, an ancient giant guarding the passage here. The danger shifted from thirst and heat stroke to the sudden, unpredictable threat of rockfall. Small stones, dislodged by the freezing and thawing cycles, would chatter down the slopes, demanding quick reaction from those walking directly beneath the cliffs. The caravan moved with urgency through the most hazardous sections, minimizing the time spent under the overhangs. The pace was agonizingly slow, sometimes only a mile or two covered in an entire day. The sheer verticality of the landscape defeated rapid progress. This demanded patience, a profound meditative slowness where rushing meant disaster. Every hour was a lesson in measured movement and conservative effort. We passed other travelers moving in the opposite direction, heading east toward China. Their faces were haggard too, but marked by the desert they had just entered. They exchanged brief, solemn nods with our drivers, 2 waves of humanity moving across the spine of the world, carrying the seeds of exchange and communication. They were mirror images of our own fatigue. The goods they carried were different, heavy. Blocks of jade, carved wooden furniture, bolts of Roman glass, all heading toward the demanding markets of the East. The exchange of information was brief, a confirmation of the safety of the path ahead, the prices in the last major city, the severity of the winter snows last year, small pieces of essential knowledge traded quickly and silently. Trail began to hug the edge of an immense glacial river, the water a shocking milky turquoise color, thick with rock flour, ground finely by the glacier. High above, the roar of the water was tremendous, a loud, constant rumble that drowned out the wind and the footsteps of the animals. It was the sound of unstoppable power of water carving the earth. We spent 3 days following the winding course of this river, unable to cross until we reached a point where the local people maintained a massive rope bridge, a treacherous structure of woven hemp and wooden planks that swayed alarmingly over the torrent below. The crossing was undertaken one beast at a time, the men steadying the bridge on either side, a terrifying slow dance of balance and risk. The camels hated the instability of the bridge, their eyes wide with fear, their protests loud and bubbling in their deep throats. They had to be blindfolded and led gently coaxed across the terrifying gap by their most trusted drivers. The sound of the bridge creaking under their weight was loud wood groaning against rope, a temporary structure, bearing colossal stress. Once across the river, the path steepened, but the topography began to hint at change, a gradual widening of the valley floor. The promise of grazing lands and settled communities began to glimmer on the horizon. The rocks softened, giving way to patchy dry grass. The first real vegetation we had seen in weeks. We were descending now out of the highest passes, leaving the eternal cold behind and moving into the welcoming embrace of the Central Asian plains. The change in altitude manifested as a dull throbbing headache in some a temporary disorientation as the blood adjusted to the richer air. The approach to the first large settlement after the passes was marked by the presence of cultivated fields, small patches of green barley and wheat surrounding clusters of low-walled houses. The site of settled life after the stark desolation of the peaks was profoundly moving. This was a caravanserai town, a place designed entirely for the movement and care of the passing trade. Its existence depended solely on the slow rhythmic arrival and departure of caravans carrying wealth and information. The walls of the main compound were high and thick, designed for defense, but the atmosphere within was one of profound relaxation and commerce. We entered the massive gates into a courtyard filled with activity, the air alive with the sound of many voices speaking different languages. The smell of cooking fires and fresh bread and the pungent odor of livestock water splashed freely in the central fountain, a luxurious sound that spoke of security and civilization. The immediate priority was the proper stabling of the animals. The camels were led to the furthest yard, where they were unloaded, rubbed down, and fed generous portions of fodder. They were the silent heroes of this immense journey, and their welfare was paramount. The unloading process was methodical, slow, heavy, lifting the bales of silkware, carried by hand into secure stone vaults sealed with official wax until they could be inspected and transported further. The spices were stacked in cool, dark storerooms, their value protected from the sun and the damp. The drivers gathered in the common room, a vast space warmed by a central brazier. The sound of their sighs as they finally sat down was a collective exhalation of 4 months of effort. The roughness of the stone benches felt like velvet after the constant motion of the camel saddles. This city was a hub, a decision point where routes diverged. Some goods would be exchanged here and sent north toward the steppes. Others would continue west toward Persia and the Mediterranean. This was where the caravan might fragment, where new drivers might be hired and new contracts on the evening. Here it was a symphony of small domestic sounds, the gentle clatter of pottery, the rhythmic grinding of grain, the distant high-pitched call of the muezzin for evening prayer. Sounds that reassured the weary traveler that the world was still ordered, still populated, still offering the necessities of life. We spent 3 days at this caravanserai, allowing the animals to regain their strength and the men to refresh themselves mentally and physically. The focus shifted from survival to planning the next stage, the negotiations, the tallying of costs, the preparation for the final arduous push toward the truly grand cities of the West. The silk was re-inspected, its quality assessed under the careful eyes of local brokers, men who knew the precise demands of the markets in Antioch and Constantinople. They felt the fabric running the smooth, cool thread through their fingers. Judging its weight, its sheen, its perfection, they spoke in hushed, respectful tones, the silk itself commanding a reverence due to its inherent value. Each day here felt like a suspension of reality, a slow, deep breath before plunging back into the demands of the road. The mountains now stood behind us, a formidable gray wall separating us from the deserts of the east the journey was nearing. Its completion, but the miles that remained were still significant, demanding every ounce of remaining. When we left the caravanserai under the light of a pale crescent moon before the first traces of dawn, the air was cool but gentle. The road ahead, flatter, softer, easier on the feet, and the hooves, the feeling of anticipation was strong. Now Samarkand was days away, a beacon of light, and civilization drawing us forward, the rhythm off journey resumed the gentle. The rocking sway, the soft patting of the feet, the sound of the slow, endless progress across the turning earth. The air moved slowly, a breath of frozen centuries. It was colder here than the deepest midnight. Stone door side, inward a low grinding. Sound to sound of ancient gears releasing their velvet hold. The darkness was not black, but a deep smoky gray, a color that swallowed light and sound equally. We held the amber lantern high, its light struggled at it. Merely kissed the edges of the vast space. Beyond a chamber opened before us, unbelievably wide. I felt not built, but carved from the earth's own bone. The ceiling was lost in the gloom. Above a single column stood, centered, massive, and smooth. It did not support the roof, but anchored the silence around. Its base scattered relics, lay not gold nor jewels, but fragments of clay and obsidian sherds of a forgotten language broken into dust. The floor beneath our worn boots was slick-etched with patterns we could not immediately decipher, swirling lines that seemed to track the passage of Starsa, a celestial map rendered in silent stone. We walked slowly toward the anchor column and movements. Hesitant, hushed, almost reverent. The silence here was a living thing, a pressure pressing down on the thoughts inside. Our minds, it was the silence of deep water or of a tomb that had waited 5,000 years for a witness. The air tasted of iron and fine silt, of something mineral and terribly old. Column itself was where the true story lay cloaked. It was covered. Not in decorative carvings, but in thin, shallow cuts of immense precision, a complex script running, spiraling upward. Traced the lines with careful fingertips. The stone felt warm against the sudden cold, and slowly the language began to speak, not in sound, but in the sudden clear understanding that pulsed directly into the mind. This chamber was not a tomb of the dead king. It was a record of the fleeing king, the final refuge, not where he died, but where he paused before vanishing. The script told. Of the great hushing one, the sun had refused to rise for 3 full seasons one. The river ran thick with black ashan. The people gathered awaiting the end. The king Nasrullah was not a ruler of great armies, but a keeper of the deepest secrets he held. The single truth that could save them, all but the truth itself, was a burden too heavy to speak. He wrote the record here for future eyes, and then he walked out into the endless gray dawn. The inscription read, I go where the light waits, I take the silence. With me for the speaking which shatter the world entire, the key lies hidden, not beneath the stone, but within the memory of the first rain. This single sentence chilled us deeper than the cold air. The key was not a physical artifact after all, it was a moment, a concept, an echo, the memory of the first rain in a world where the sun had died. Looked around the vast chamber, searching for any clue, any suggestion of water there. It was only dry dust and the relentless stone. The story felt incomplete. A fragment caught in amber. We moved around the central pillar slowly until we came to the shadowed side where the light from the lantern struggled most severely. There was a small alcove hidden close to the floor, not carved into the stone, but seemingly melted away like wax, exposed to intense focused heat. Inside the alcove nestled a single bowl lay. Simple ceramic dish, utterly plain, unadorned. It was filled with something dark and smooth. We knelt down, careful not to disturb the dust of ages. The bowl was heavy, heavier than its size suggested. We lifted it gently, tilting it toward the amber light, and contained ancient water, or something that looked like water. It was still utterly undisturbed, thick like oil, a liquid blackness that absorbed the light. Entire, it did not reflect the lantern. It drank it in this. Was perhaps the water of the first rain. We dared not touch it, dared not taste it. It felt less like a substance and more like time trapped, solidified into this velvet darkness as we stared into. The still surfacey smoothness began to ripple infinitesimally, a disturbance not caused by air or earthquake, but from within the liquid itself. A single image began to form on the surface like ink spreading across paper slowly. It was a scene not of the Silent King, but of a far distant coastline. A beach of white sand under a twin sun-well, pale yellow orbs hanging low on the horizon. The coastline was utterly deserted, pristine, and then the image vanished out, that the black liquid returning. To perfect stillness, we looked at each other, breath held tight. The chamber was silent, profoundly hushed. What connection did the Silent King Nasrullah have with a distant world under twin suns? Was his vanishing not merely leaving his kingdom, but leaving his world entire? I go where the light waits we. Check the surrounding stone, running our hands along the smoothed velvet surface, seeking any further script or map near the alcove where the dark bowl rested. We found a second etching faint, almost invisible. Was a diagram of two interlocking circles, and between them a single narrow sliver of crescent light, symbol of connection of passage. The diagram seemed to relate directly to the bowl, as if the water was the necessary medium for traversing the space. Between the circles, between worlds, between times, between silence and sound. Complexity of the knowledge stunned us. This was not mere history. This was scientia, hidden understanding of universal mechanics. We lingered long near the pillar, absorbing the meaning. The very stone seemed to hum with potential energy. The air itself felt thicker, denser charged. Felt the strange pull, the need to understand if the black water in the ceramic bowl was truly the path. The waiting light, we knew the journey was far from over. We still needed the memory of the first rain, and then the sound began, small and high, pitched a sound that seemed to come from the stone itself, or perhaps from deep within the earth below us. It was not threatening, not aggressive. A pure, resonant tone like a heavy bronze bell rung softly far away. The tone intensified, slowly rising in pitch. The amber light in the lantern flickered, violently casting shadows that danced and stretched, distorting the etched figures on the floor. Felt the stone vibrating beneath our feet, a deep comforting tremor, not frightening. The dark water in the bowl began to tremble, the black surface blurring into motion. We watched, hypnotized, as the water spun faster until it was a vortex of polished velvet blackness. It began to emit a low light of its own, a soft indigo glow, not strong but pervasive, illuminating the dusty chamber with unearthly color. Indigo light touched the ceiling above Ian. For the first time we could see the roof clearly. It was not smooth. It was covered in stars, thousands of tiny glittering flecks of silver dust arranged into constellations we did not recognize, maps of skies long vanished or skies yet to be born. The ceiling was the true archive of the king's journey. Column below was merely the index. The indigo light grew stronger. Felt a slight pressure on our chests, a sense of being gently but firmly pulled upward. Air smelled sharply of ozone and cold metal. The Silent King had not merely walked into the gray dawn. He had activated this mechanism, this passaging, left the key for those who might follow. We realized with a deep inner certainty. The bowl and the water were activating now, perhaps triggered by our prolonged presence here, by the subtle heat of our living breath. It was preparing the path, preparing the connection. The twin suns on the water's surface reappeared, lurger, now clearer, now closer. They looked like immense shining eyes observing us. The sound reached a crescendo, a pure unwavering human. Then it stopped abruptly, utterly. The silence that followed was total, absolute. It was the silence of deep outer space. The indigo light remained suspended in the air, hovering above the dark water and the bowl. The water itself had stopped spinning, but the image of the twin suns remained fixed, the perfect circle of light reflected in the blackness. We stared, unable to move, compelled by the mystery. The memory of the first rain remained unsolved, but the mechanism of passage stood open. Did the memory unlock the destination, or did the memory merely grant permission to step through? Chamber held its breath, waiting for the next move, the next intention. We knew the threshold was before us. The question was what awaited beyond the Gatined, if the silence of the ancient king was truly broken by stepping onto that silent shore. We saw then, just at the edges of the indigo light, a faint shimmering outline. Was a shadow, not of us, but of another figure, tall and cloaked, standing utterly still, watching us. From the periphery of the light, it was an ephemeral presence, a ghostly outline perhaps, the shadow of Nasrullah himself, silent keeper, observing his legacy. The figure was indistinct, undefined, but its gaze felt heavy, ancient, burdened. It raised a single hand slowly toward Yus, not in warning, not in welcome, in a gesture of profound distancio. Signaled that the journey ahead was lonely and that the history we sought was dangerous. The shimmering shadow held the gesture. The velvet black water pulsed softly. Beneath the twin suns, the path lay open, the silence begged to be crossed. What was the memory of the first rain, and who was this silent watcher waiting for using the deep, hushed reaches of the ancient earth? The air remained thick with the scent of ozone. We breathed slowly, deeply absorbing the mystery. The next step was into the unknown. Depth of darkness that promised either truth or eternal sleep. We waited near the edge of the passaga, listening for the echo of the king's final footstep. The door of the cavern remained open behind you, but the light ahead was too compelling, too stranger, silent. Invitation into the deep history under the gaze of the cloaked figure and the reflection of the twin. Sons of velvet darkness, waiting the darkness was thin. Now a stretched velvet cloak, pulled slowly away by an unseen hand. The sky bruised indigo above the eastern ridge. The camels knew this synth air, tasted different, thinner, cooler, carrying the promise of water, not just alkali dust, but deep, fresh, well water, stone water, moss water. The scent of burning charcoal and distant cooking smoke, a signal unmistakable after 7 moons of silence. The wheels spun slow, hypnotic revolutions, grinding. The last grit of the Taklamakan, and beneath their heavy rims, the great lead camel, named Shahar, stepped with an almost arrogant rhythm, his bells. Dull bronze whispers against the hushed quiet of the valley floor. They approached the rise, the final low. Hillock that would reveal the city walls, the stone was gray, ancient, etched with the passage of centuries, not carved by man, but scored by wind and rain and time itself, a history older than the silk they carried. The first sliver of the city appeared. A low band of clay and baked earth, a promise shimmering in the weak light. The drivers were shadows draped over shadows, only the whites of their eyes catching the faint perdon glow. The rhythm of their steps had become less force, less driven by obligation and more driven by instinct, the finality of their purpose drawing them forward. Like a massive slow tide pulled by the moon's gravity, they were exhausted beyond simple. Fatigued, their very bones humming with the memory of endless slow movement, the constant sway, the silent acceptance of the road. The silence of the open desert had been absolute, but this silence was different. It was the quiet before the city wakes, the pause before commerce takes its first deep breath, a comforting weight that pressed down the anxieties of the long journey. The wind dropped completely here, sheltered by the final mountains. The only sound, the soft padding of 60 camels and the creak of the dry leather harnesses, the road beneath their feet. Changed texture, shifting from soft compacted sand to rough worn cobblestones. The transition was subtle, almost missed, but the sound of the hoofs changed, a duller clap, a more resonant strike against the ground of civilization. They rounded the last curve, and the gate stood, revealed colossal, heavy, iron-banded wood resting slightly ajar in the wall of buff-colored stone. The watchman, a cloaked figure barely visible, stirred at his post, seeing the long, silent line of the caravan approaching. There was no rush, no shouting of welcome or inquiry, only a quiet understanding of the magnitude of the watchman's slid. The heavy bolt back, a slow, grinding noise of metal against stone, a sound that traveled up the spine, a sound of crossing. A threshold, the gate opened, just wide enough, Shahar dipping his great head to pass under the massive lintel beam. The air immediately inside the walls felt heavy and still, and cold, a relief from the open desert heat. The transition was absolute. Immediate silence replaced by a low hum, a perpetual vibration of commerce and life already stirring in the deepest alleys. Cloaked figures moved like slow shadows along the narrow cobbled streets, their baskets filled with early morning wares. The scent of spices hit them, a complex layered wall of cinnamon, pepper, clove, and something sweet, something exotic, something new. Their journey was done. The destination held them. Now safe within its embrace, the silk bales settled, finality resting heavy. On the dusty camelbacks, the streets were labyrinthine, winding past high mud brick walls and small arched doorways, each turning, slowing them further, forcing them to yield to the strange new rhythm of the city. The pace became almost unbearable. In its slowness after the open speed of the desert, the slow, deliberate step of the camel was now a hindrance jostling against the sleeping city. Sound of water running from a small fountain gurgled gently in a hidden courtyard. Sound so purely clean, so refreshing after months of rationing from skin bags that the men almost stopped just to listen to its freedom. The light began to creep higher above the walls, painting the highest minarets in pale amber gold. A true city sunrise. Not a harsh desert blast, but a gentle illumination of baked clay and carved cedar wood. They followed the main thoroughfare, which widened slightly, leading inevitably toward the great Caravanserai, the heart of trade and rest the place. Where the road ended, and the ledger began, the great inn for travelers rose, before them a massive rectangular fortress of stone, its central courtyard already showing signs of life. Early risers preparing tea or unloading smaller packs. The huge arched entrance to the Caravanserai swallowed the entire caravan, the transition immediate. Absolutely, a final barrier crossed the air inside, was thick with the scent of hay and old sweat and dry mortar. A safe, familiar smell of many journeys ended here. The silence of the courtyard walls muffled the city noise, a complete withdrawal from the outside world. They stopped the long line, halting simultaneously with a soft collective sigh of ropes stretching and leather. Settling, the men did not speak. The fatigue was too deep for words. The labor of unloading began, a slow, methodical ritual, enacted countless times before, but this time imbued with the sweetness of finality. The heavy silk bales came down one by one, each a velvet weight removed from the camel's back. The cloth was dusty dull from the long passage, but beneath the fine gray coating, the deep rich dye of the crimson and sapphire blue waited their journey almost complete, their value secure. Each bale was checked against the manifest, a slow process of counting and verification. The merchant Nasrullah himself watched from the steps, his eyes narrowed against the light, but holding a deep satisfaction. 7 moons of risk, 7 moons of dust and thirst, all concluded in the heavy thud of silk. On the stone floor of the courtyard, the camels were led away to the stable bays, their great legs buckling slightly as they were finally relieved of their loads. The soft chew of hay began almost immediately, a sound of profound animal contentment. The drivers themselves began the process of settling their small, meager packs laid out on the high stone sleeping platforms. Ring in the courtyard, the coolness of the stone seeped into their very being, pulling the heat of the desert journey out. Through their skin, the roughness of the wool blanket felt like luxurious softness after the hard ground, and the constant vibration of the saddle. The men moved like automatons, cleaning their faces, rinsing the fine silt from their beards, the relief settling into their shoulders, a tangible dropping of tension. One man named Rashid found a quiet corner against the eastern wall where the morning sun would not reach until midday. He spread his small worn mat and lay down the stone. Cool beneath him, the world around him continued to move, the low murmuring of other travelers, the clatter of a tin cup, the gentle rhythmic sweep of a brush against the cobbles. But for Rashid, the movement had stopped. The silence of true rest began. He closed his eyes, not against the light, but against the endless distance that his mind had been forced to hold for so long. The memory of the shifting dunes, the relentless blue sky, the distant howl of the wind, everything receding into a vague background. The weight of the completed journey pressed down on him, heavy and breathing deepened, slowing, matching the gentle rhythm of the sleeping camels in a nearby bay. The scent of hay and stone and rest filled his nostrils. The slow quiet, decay of effort, the perfect stillness after profound motion. His body accepted the stop, the exhaustion demanded surrender. Sound of the caravanserai became distorted, elongated, the whisper of voices, like silk rustling across stone, the gentle scraping of sandals on the ground, like the slow hiss of sand dissolving time, lost its sharp edges, smoothing into a continuous velvet flow. The memory of the road was now just a distant drone, a vibration in the ground beneath him that was slowly fading. The journey was over, the arrival complete, the responsibility lifted. He sank deeper into the cold embrace of the stone floor, letting the city. It's quiet lullaby of commerce and peace. It was a point of stillness within a turning world. Finally anchored, finally home for now. The sleep came heavy and complete. A reward earned through the slow passage of endless desert days. A sleep deeper than any star-filled night. A true rest without the need to wake and watch for dawn, he imagined. The long, slow miles folding back upon themselves, becoming nothing more than a soft, distant memory. The slow rhythm of the caravan bells fading to silence, the desert sun turning to a warm, deep amber that covered him, like a final comforting blanket. The journey completed this sleep absolute and endless and deep until the city itself began to stir a quiet, unending peace. A final moment of perfect stillness after the long road. Last mountain pass yielded, slowly grudging its height and its heavy cold air. The wind stopped its screaming, now replaced by the hushed sigh of pines lower down it. Was a descent, a long rolling, unwinding down the slope we knew so well. The path softened from sharp stone to a yielding reddish earth, the color of dried blood days blurred into the gentle slope away from the high roof of the world. The palmiers folding back their vast icy shoulders. We saw the water first, not the shimmer of mirage water, but real water, moving water, silver threading through. The valleys below the camels knew they lifted their ancient heads and smelled the moisture far away. A promise fulfilled a deep resonant sound in their throats, not complaint. But quiet understanding, the journey nearly done. This was the end of the great fastness, the barrier broken, the long imprisonment of the high steps released. Weeks barren gray rock were folding away, swallowed by the horizon. We entered the belt of orchard land, the first true green after 5 months of ochre. Sand and relentless white sun, the smell of apricot trees in bloom faint, but piercing sweet carried on the breeze, a dizzying perfume. But the air was velvet, now cool, against the sun-etched skin of our faces. A comforting change, the dust of the Gobi settled forever, it seemed, into the deep folds of our heavy cloaks. We did not shake it out immediately. We carried the desert within us, a slow memory, a trace of the long emptiness. The change was profound, the shift from survival to existence. From enduring to anticipating, the landscape grew softer, more welcoming, the curves of the hills gentler. First, isolated farmsteads appeared, patches of cultivated earth, meticulously tended smoke rose straight and thin into the clear afternoon sky. A signal of settled life, a beacon of rest. The guards relaxed their postures, the tension that had been a constant companion for half a year. Finally easing, we moved slower now paradoxically, because we were so close, the need to rush gone replaced. By the sweet anticipation of arrival, the path widened, becoming a proper road rutted and worn by centuries of caravans before us. This road knew the weight of silk and the shimmer of jade. It knew the burden of history. Then the walls appeared finally. Golden, stone high, and imposing vast fortifications stretching across the plain, etched deeply into the history of this place, this trading hub, this nexus, the great city of Kashgar. Sound reached us long before the gates, a constant low hum of thousands of lives, the deep breath of a thriving market. The city of Kashgar lay waiting its deep markets, ready to absorb our burden, our worries, our valuable cargo. Saw the movement upon the walls, the watchful eyes of the city guards, small figures. Cloaked against the descending sun, the sight brought a strange mix of relief and renewed alertness, the need for caution, even at the gates. This city was the final exchange, the great release of the long months of risk, the final hour of the journey. Approached, slowly measured by the rhythmic fall of the camel's feet on the paved road. Saw the other travelers converging from different directions, paths intersecting at this crucial point. Furs from the north, spices from the south, amber from the west, all drawn to this hub, this meeting of worlds. The air was suddenly complex, full of new smells, animal musk, unfamiliar. Cooking smoke, the metallic scent of currency. We formed a disciplined line waiting for the scrutiny of the gate officials. Gate itself was vast, an archway of dark, carved wood bound with thick iron etched with protective symbols. Passing through was like stepping into a different world. A sudden explosion of human activity. The silence of the desert was violently shattered by the cacophony of the city, the press of people, donkey carts, porters, water sellers, mendicants, all swirling around the main thoroughfare. Our camels looked bewildered, their long silence broken by the insistent shouts of the city dwellers. We steered them carefully toward the great caravanserai, the traveler's fortress within the city walls. It was a structure of immense stone stability built to withstand time and war and the demands of commerce. The interior courtyard was immense, a rectangle, packed earth and stone surrounded by 2 stories of vaulted rooms. The noise here was amplified. Merchants shouted in 10 different tongues: Pahlavi, Sogdian, Greek, Persian, even the strange clicking languages of the mountain tribes. The scent of spices was overwhelming, a dense cloud of saffron and pepper and ginger, sharp and pungent. The air thick with incense and cooking fires, the roasting of mutton, the brewing of strong tea. We led the great beasts to their designated stalls, deep vaulted spaces. Around the inner perimeter, the work began immediately, the final unburdening, the meticulous separation of the cargo. Every bale of silk, every sack of rare tea, every bolt of fine cotton had to be accounted for. Cloaked overseer watched his eyes, sharp, calculating, ensuring no damage had been incurred over the thousands of miles. The silk bales were heavy velvet rolls, pale gold, moonlight white, deep imperial red. They were carried on shoulders up the stone steps to the secure storage rooms. The final destination of their long travel, the jade-smooth, cool green stone, was carefully unwrapped from its protective cloths, displayed on dark velvet cushions. Each piece a treasure representing months of careful negotiation, weeks of fearful transport. The light within the storeroom was amber soft, filtered through thick oil lamps casting long, slow shadows. It was the light of security, the light of settled commerce, the light of earned profit. We felt the exhaustion deep in our bones, the accumulated fatigue of sun and wind and constant watchfulness. But the work drove us, the need to finalize the contracts to secure the payment. The sound of counting was everywhere, the clinking of silver coins, the soft rustle of paper money, the weight of gold. Language of trade was universal, a shared understanding of value and risk. Negotiations were loud and sometimes fierce. The market men of Kashgar were known for their sharp dealings, but our overseer was patient. He had survived the desert. He could survive the bargaining table. He sat cross-legged on a thick rug, sipping hot spiced milk, his face impassive, his eyes fixed on the ledger. The price of white silk soared. The market demand was relentless. The furs from the northern tribes were exchanged for fine metalwork and intricate glass. The circle of commerce was closing, the goods flowing outward, the wealth flowing back ours. Passed in this intense exchange, the shadows stretching and then shortening as the day moved toward evening. Finally, the last bale was secured, the last coin counted, the ledger marked with the seal of the Khan's tax collector. A moment of profound quiet settled over our immediate corner of the caravanserai. The great beasts were watered and fed, their heavy frame resting in the cool darkness of the stalls. We stripped off our heavy outer cloaks, the dust falling to the stone floor in small tired piles. The relief was physical, a slow easing of muscle and mind who led to the upper rooms, clean, simple chambers. Looking down over the bustling courtyard, the floors were covered with thick rugs patterned in deep reds and blues. Bedrolls were softer than anything we had known for months, thick cotton, stuffed with fine wool. We ate a meal rich and flavorful. Stewed lamb rice spiced with cumin and coriander, fresh flatbread hot from the oven. It was a feast of civilization, a contrast to the dry rations of the desert trail. The fire in the small brazier provided a gentle warmth, a sense of domestic security. As twilight deepened, the noise in the caravanserai began to soften. The shouting subsided into a low murmur. Gate guards barred the massive doors with a heavy clang, a sound of final closure and protection. We slept finally on the velvet cushions, provided by the prosperity of the Khan, no longer the hard sand, the chill night air, the constant need for one eye open, but the steady thick silence of stone walls holding back the world, the comforting weight of the ceiling above the amber light of the oil lamp cast long, slow shadows on the plastered ceiling. We did not blow it out immediately. We cherished the steady glow, the absence of moonlit fear. The body remembered the movements of the road, even in sleep, the phantom swaying of the saddle, the rhythmic plodding, but the mind was settling, unfurling, like a sail finally docked. The journey ended not with a desperate rush, but with a deep, slow breath, a sigh of fulfillment. Desert is behind us, the long sleep earned and deep and comforting. Memory of the road, now gentle, only a soft echo in the stillness of the night. We dreamed of cool running water of green, valleys of familiar faces, long unseen. We dreamed of home, of safety, of the wealth secured. The stone structure embraced us, ancient and powerful, holding us secure until the morning. The long road vanished into the blackness of the past months, dissolving into the quiet. Safety of Kashgar sleep now. The journey is complete. The great road waits only until the morning light sleep. Deeply knowing the stone walls are strong, the doors are barred, the cargo is safe. The rhythm of the trade city slowly fades into a comforting. Hushed quiet descends over the hundreds of lives resting within these stone walls. Sleep, now sleep. The hushed air of the cavern held the knowledge tight. Rex's breath was shallow and slow, a silk thread in the dark. Did not need the torch now, for the room itself emitted a deep amber glow, a light that did not cast shadows, but dissolved them into soft oblivion. He stood before the plinth of black obsidian stone, the surface cool to the touch, older than the first whisper of rain upon. The plinth rests the chronos scroll, not parchment or hide, but solid light, a loop of crystalline dust suspended. In perfect stillness it turned slowly upon its axis, a silent gyroscope of forgotten ages, and as Rex drew nearer, the light intensified, not hurting the ice, but sinking gently into the memory of the sight itself. He reached out his hand, cloaked in the velvet silence of the abyss. The air between his fingers and the artifact thrummed with a low resonance, like the distant singing of 1,000 ancient bells. Deep beneath the earth, this was not a record to be read with ink and paper. It was the summation of time itself, echo of every sunrise that had ever graced the plains, the sorrow of every empire that had crumbled into sand, joy of every small life lived and lost within this silent dust that poured into Rex, not as information but as feeling, a profound oceanic wave of understanding that transcended words. He saw the etching on the walls around him, carvings made by human tools, but patterns formed by elemental fortress. The constant, ceaseless grinding of epics. He understood that history was not a line, but a vast breathing sphere, and every moment existed simultaneously wrapped in the deep velvet quiet of the mountain. Heart. Rex closed his eyes, leaning slightly against the cold stone, and let the weight of the chronos scroll settle. Within him it was not a burden, it was a quiet grounding, the relentless need for knowing dissolved, replaced by a calm acceptance of the magnificent scale of unknowing. He was a grain of sand, yes, but a grain that had seen the entire beach, a single drop that had tasted the ocean itself. He stood there for what felt like moments or centuries, having lost its tyrannical grip in this hidden sanctum. The amber light softened, receding slowly back into the core of Estonia. Gentle withdrawal, a graceful farewell. Rex opened his eyes. The sight of the cave walls somehow richer, more defined. He realized the scroll had gone quiet, waiting perhaps for the next scholar, or perhaps having completed its purpose for him. There was no need to take it or touch it. The quest was over, but the journey had become internal. He turned slowly, his boots crunching slightly on the fine pale dust of the floor. The way out seemed clearer now, not easier, but less fraught. He retraced his steps through the winding obsidian corridors, torchlight casting slow, elongated shadows that danced and bowed to him like light old guardians acknowledging his passing. The air grew steadily cooler and thinner as he climbed away from the geothermal heat of the deep chamber. He passed the etched symbols of the Sun Kings, their eyes following him with placid ancient wisdom. The stone felt smooth and polished under his hand, a constant companion in the profound darkness. He reached the final ascent, the steep, narrow passage that led to the outer world. Sliver of light, weak and pale, pierced the darkness above it. Was the first indication of dawn, the true dawn, not the symbolic light of the scroll, but the return to the cyclical turning of the world. He pushed through the final crumbling archway, ridging onto the high plateau, where the winds bit sharp and clean. Desert stretched infinitely before him, a boundless expanse of hushed oranges and bruised purples. The last stars were fading, dissolving into the coming brilliance of the sun. Rex stood at the precipice, the scholar who had found his answer, but found it not in a grand proclamation, but in a profound silence. He started his descent, the slow, careful placing of feet upon loose shale. The mountainside was cloaked in shadows. Still a great sleeping giant, stirring in the cool morning air. Air smelled of dry earth and far-off ancient, specious scent that promised both desolation and perseverance. He did not rush, he did not look. Back the knowledge was integrated within Hema, new bedrock upon which his thoughts now rested. The world seemed suddenly quieter, its noises muffled by the great cotton-wool of history. He reached the base of the mountains as the first true ray of sunlight struck the plain. It was a moment of fierce clarity. The light was gold, pure and searing it. Chased away the last vestiges of the night and the last fears of the Questrax, walked toward his small camp, pitched days ago, a forgotten speck against the immense scale of the landscape. The old leather satchel lay waiting beside the cold fire pit. He removed the last of his maps, the charts of stars and shadows, the careful calculations of hidden passages. They were just paper, now beautiful relics of a journey. Past he knelt by the pit, striking the flint once twisted, small plume of white smoke rising into the calm morning air. The fire caught quickly, licking at the dry brush. He fed the maps to the flames, watching them curl and blacken. The chrono scroll needed no earthly map, no guide for the eyes. The path was now etched within his deepest knowing. Watched the sun climb higher, a great molten disk of comfort. Warmth spread over the desert floor, awakening small hidden insects. The slow creeping heat of the day began its ascent. Rex felt a profound and gentle exhaustion, kind that follows a lifetime of searching, finally ending in discovery. Lay back upon his bedroll, the sand cool beneath the thin canvas. His eyes tracked the slow, deliberate movement of a hawk circling high above a perfect arc of freedom in the blue. The hawk was history in motion, untroubled by time or knowledge, simply existing in the magnificence of the moment. Rex closed his eyes. The visions of the cavern, the amber light, the hushed echo of ages past thee mingled with the present warmth of the sun upon his face. He did not dream of journeys past or future. He simply rested within magnificent. Now the quiet came in a deep, overwhelming, restful stillness. It was the silence he had sought, the one that preceded all words and followed all sound, the heart of history beating a slow, steady rhythm. Called to him, drawing him deeper into the softness of the earth and the infinite calm of the sky. Rex. And so the long journey concludes not with a roar of triumph, but with the gentlest sigh of realization. The silent library is always within us, waiting for the proper memento reveal its final truth. This is the end of the quest, dear listener. The scholar has faced Dan. Now you too must find yours. Allow the deep shadows of the mountain to cover you. Now feel the warmth of that ancient amber light spreading through your limbs, every muscle, every fiber of your being, relaxing, sinking, yielding to the slow, deliberate turning of the quiet world. The desert wind is a velvet hush across the plain, scaring away all thoughts of what was and what must be. There is only this moment, this absolute stillness, this comforting weight of peace, the memory of the Chronos scroll, the knowledge. It imparted, it stays with us, yes, but it settles gently. It does not demand attention. It simply offers comfort, a deep awareness that all things are connected. All stories are one story, and all time is one soft sleep drift now into the silence. That Rex found a silence so complete, so protective that nothing else matters. You are safe, you are sheltered, you are sinking into the deepest of the velvet night. Let the whispers of the ancient ones guide you now. They are not voices, they are merely feelings of warmth, of security, of deep, deep rest. Thank you for allowing me, Nasrullah, to guide you through these 10 chapters of silence and stone. This journey through History Lullubay has reached its final resting place. The chronicles are closed, the torches extinguish sleep. Now, dear friends, leap deeply and dream of the quiet permanence of the stars. Your mind is clear, your body heavy and soft. Let go, let go, let go. Night holds you entirely now. Farewell until the next quiet telling. May your rest be long and profoundly peaceful. Sleep deeply now. Sleep, sleep. The desert waits, the mountains watch. Good night. Good night. Good night.